going to start working on our reductive linoleum block printing. But first I'd like to sort of talk to you a little bit about the history behind the block print. Originally started in China, artists used a piece of wood to create images and designs, and then they would take these images and flip them over, put ink on them, and create a print, okay? Wood, as you can see, is really hard, and they used to have to take a hammer and a chisel to create these grooved areas, which really took a long time. And not only that, wood was really expensive. So as artists started to work with this material a little bit more, they began to figure out that it might be easier to use something that was a little softer. So a gentleman by the name of Frederick Walton, who actually was a rubber manufacturer, came up with the linoleum block, okay? So linoleum is actually used on floors, and for those of you that answered on a pre-assessment, good job. So linoleum is basically the same material that they use on floors, but for the purposes of for us, linoleum is actually in the block form, and the way this is made is by melting linseed oil, and it gets sort of thick, and then they run it through a mesh, and it dries, and it starts to create like a layer. So all these layers are pressed together, and you get a block that looks like this. And you know, they're really flimsy, they're really easy to cut, and it's just a lot easier. And artists use this a little bit more for teaching, and it was also less expensive. So this is sort of like the printmakers, the poor printmakers' form of block printing. And that's just a little bit of history behind that. So when you start to work with this block, you want to make sure that you're sort of gentle with it, because if you start to bend it too much, it's going to crack, okay? And you're only going to get one block, because you can actually use both sides of this block, okay? But for our purposes, you're only going to use one block, okay? Or one side of the block. And the way you're going to start is by taking your linoleum block, and you're going to get a piece of regular copy paper, and you're going to trace the shape of your block, which is what? Yep, a rectangle. And you can decide if you would like to do a vertical image or a horizontal image. So you're going to trace this, and then you know that your image is this big, okay? When you plan out your drawing, you can pretty much do whatever you like. If you want to do design, that's great. If you want to do something that is related to nature, that's really good. Or if you just, you know, if you feel like getting a little bit more experimental, maybe you'll draw something that you've never drawn before. So I'm actually gonna do a car or a bus. Now when you do your image, make sure you take into consideration all the details that you want to add, okay? You can make a simple image, and that's really great, because one of the nice things about linoleum block printings and the qualities that they have is that it's always this high contrast image. So if you remember that wood block that I showed you, this is a design, but when you start to ink it, and this will actually make sense when I show you, the only thing that is going to show up on your piece of paper when you put the block on it is these areas that are raised, okay? So this is sort of like a relief sculpture, okay? So take that into consideration a little bit. But the high contrast image is generally really simple, and if you guys found an example, you can see that they only used, for the majority, they only use one color for the block printing. But for reductive linoleum block printing, you're actually going to be using a whole bunch of different colors, which will be kind of fun. So I'm going to get started on this drawing, or finish this drawing. My drawing ready to go. As you can see, I've added several details, but my drawing is sort of chunky, because I'm trying to think of how I can make it more of a high contrast image, okay? So there you have it. So there's my drawing, and now I'm ready to transfer this drawing to my block print. So when you transfer your image, what you're going to do first is you're going to flip over your piece of paper. You're going to take your pencil and use the side of it, and you're going to fill in this entire area with pencil. And what you'll do, you'll take a pair of scissors and you'll cut this out. And make sure that everything that you've cut out has pencil in the background. Okay. And now you're ready to transfer your drawing to the block. And the way you do that is by taking your image, putting it right on top so your drawing is facing up, and then you take your pencil and you just trace over the image that you've created. Get to make sure that it's working. To start cutting, and you're going to use this carver's tool that looks like this. Okay, right now there's no blade in it, but when you add your blade, there's a whole different tip that you can use. There's different tips that you can use. So there's this sort of like square one for big areas. This one's usually pretty good for big areas, but it's also a little bit more pointed, so you can use it for smaller details. Same with this one, it's a little narrower. Then you also have sort of this big giant one. These are usually the ones that you'll use more towards the end, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then you also have this really tiny one. I find that these little small ones aren't that great because the lines are so small that when you put the ink on top of your plate, it actually goes into the grooves, and then you sort of lose that detail. And if you do want to try that and see what happens, just go ahead, be my guest. But you know, each of you will have your own tool that you like to work with, or blade. So the way you put this in is you want to make sure this is loose, and if you look at the inside of this, there's sort of like a little gap right here or around that circle, and you'll take, I'm not going to use, let's see, I'll use this one. So then what you do is you take your blade and you flip it to the side that has the dull edge. It's sort of around like this, okay, you see that? And then you'll stick it in, and if we're lucky, it'll go in all the way, and then you're going to turn it, twist it, so it's nice and tight. See? Nice and tight, okay? When you begin to cut, make sure that your area is clean, that you're not hitting elbows with anyone, and please, 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 make sure that when you are talking to someone, you don't have this in your hand and you're moving around like this, because you could potentially hurt someone, okay? And one of the things you do want to do before you start cutting is actually outline your linoleum block with Sharpie. When you start to cut this, make sure that your area is clean, you don't have a whole bunch of stuff around, and that you are mindful of your neighbors, because you don't want to poke anybody, because that would hurt, and that you are not talking with this in your hand. If you're like me, you like to talk with your hands, and you don't want to be waving this around, because you might poke someone. So the way this works is, these are really soft, so it's going to be really easy to cut this. If you're seriously having a problem cutting it, your blade is just not sharp enough, and just switch it out, okay? And then you're going to put your old blades in a little tin that I have that says old blades on it. Looks like this. Old blades. Okay. All right. I'm ready to get started. When you cut, you want to make sure that you are parallel to your cutting surface, same like you would a X-Acto knife. Okay. You don't want to gouge it and try to cut. Okay, that's not really going to work, and you're not going to get really clean lines, okay? You want to make sure that you're always parallel, and if you are struggling to cut this, it's because you're probably not doing it correctly. I find it easier to hold the blade like this when you cut, okay? And you always want to cut away from yourself. You never want to cut towards your hand, okay? Your hand always wants to be behind the blade. When you're cutting something round, you're going to be turning your mat. So you're always cutting away from yourself, okay? Remember, parallel cutting away. Now, the first cut that you make, you're not going to be cutting away a lot, okay? If you remember, you are going to cut away what you don't want printed, okay? So I am going to actually cut away at my clouds, okay? Because I'd like these to stay as the same color as the paper. So, and that'll make more sense when I show you when we print, okay? So I'm going to cut this away. Again, I'm not cutting towards my hand, and I'm turning the block as I need to go. So if I'm going to go this way, I'm not going to, it's much easier to just turn your block and cut it, okay? This blade is actually kind of dull, but it works, okay? And I'm actually going to leave a couple of chunks in there. Because one of the nice things about block printing is that you have sort of those textural lines, okay? And then, remember, I'm always cutting away from myself, and my hand is not in front of the blade. Okay, so now I'm ready to start printing, okay? I just cut away my cloud, okay? Now whenever I print this first one, you're not going to be able to see any of these other parts. You're only going to be able to see the clouds, okay? So in order to get started to print, you want to make sure that your whole area is wiped away, okay? You need to have a piece of newsprint or brown paper under your working surface, okay? You need to have your paper ready to print, and for your first print, you're actually going to use a piece of copy paper because you want to make sure that it looks good, okay? Then you're going to need your plate. Oops. You need your plate, okay? You also need a brayer. This is a brayer. We use this to transfer the ink to the block. And you always want to set your brayer down with the handle down, just like this, so the roller's on top. If everyone kept putting this down, you start to get indents in the actual roller. You need a palette knife, and then you need an acrylic plate to put your paint on, okay? All right, that's a lot of stuff, but this is what you need, okay? Also, keep in mind that when you print, this is gonna go the opposite way that you want it to do. So if you're gonna write something, when you carve it, it needs to be the opposite. So the word's actually going to be written backwards. And then you need some paint. You can experiment and decide if you want to go from light to dark or dark to light, okay? So I'm going to start with this color pink. Okay, there's my ink, Speedball. This is a water-based ink, but you want to make sure that you're wearing an apron because this will stain your clothes. Okay, and you're going to start by taking your palette knife, and you want to go into this and sort of scrape the top because we want to make sure that we're keeping these sort of clean and they don't get sticky. And you're going to want to start with about a tablespoon of ink, okay? And you're going to put it right there. Then you're going to close this up so it doesn't get dry. And if you're using the same color as someone else, you guys can share, okay? There'll be less cleanup. Then you're going to put that off to the side, just like that. Okay, I have my piece of paper ready. I'm I'm gonna rearrange here a little bit, okay? And you wanna start by taking your roller, putting it in the ink, and you're gonna roll this back and forth, just like that. Get a whole, you're gonna get a lot of ink on there. Your first print needs to have a pretty good amount of ink. Then I'm gonna come over here, and I'm gonna start to roll it onto my block. See here that sticky sound? That's a good sound. You want to hear that. Okay, that way you know it's sticking to your block. Just in case, we'll put a little bit more. Okay. Now you can already see that the ink was not picked up by the areas that I cut. Okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your block and you're going to place it right in the center of your paper. You want to be as organized as you can. You're going to flip it over, and you're going to press it down with your hand. The other thing that you can use is a hand. The other thing you can use is a hand press. Here's a hand press, okay? This is what a hand press is. If you want to use that, you can. Otherwise, your hand usually works pretty good. Okay? And you can also use a clean brayer. Make sure it's clean. Now I'm going to carefully lift up my print, and there it is. There's my first print. So it looks like I needed to put a little bit more color over here, so in this area. So when you do your next print, which is going to be on nice paper, you know, keep in mind that you want to sort of fix this a little bit, and so you'll add some more ink to that area. So you're going to create 4 prints, and that includes your practice print. Remember, you need to do your practice print. And my suggestion to you is write a P here so you know that it's your practice print, okay? So when you do the rest of your prints, you want to make sure that your hands are clean because you want them to come out nice and professional looking and precise, okay? Because part of printmaking is sort of getting that really good quality print, okay? So now you're going to do this 3 more times after your practice. Here's my paper. Okay, so now I have my 4 prints, and that's including my copy paper print. Okay, this is my practice paper. But now I have 3 prints plus this, 4. Okay, you want to make sure you have 4. And then you're going to put these on the drying rack and you're going to let them dry. And now we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, you finished your 4 prints. Now you're ready to move on to the next step. So you need to clean your plate, okay? Just stick it under water, use your hand, make sure you're wearing an apron, and take off as much of the paint as you can. Okay, this is a water-based paint, so you don't have to worry about it sticking to your hands. Okay, use sort of like lukewarm water. I would like to keep my car pink, so I'm actually going to carve the car away, okay? And I'm using a bigger blade, and remember, you're cutting away from yourself. You want to stay parallel. Hope you guys can see that. You want to stay parallel to your plate because it's easier to cut, and you're just going to go ahead and cut that whole car out, okay? Because that's what I want to stay pink. So this is what reductive linoleum block printing is. You're always cutting away and doing a different layer each time. So reductive means to take away. So each time you're taking away something. So it's going to be reduced to basically nothing. And with reductive linoleum block printing, once you're done printing, that's it. You're done. Your plate is capiche. I'm done carving away at my car. So now I'm going to print again. And this is how it's going to go down. Remember, you are going to put down a piece of newspaper or a piece of brown paper. You need your block, okay? You need your copy paper print. Remember, there's a P on it, okay? Then you need your ink. I'm going to do brown next. You need your brayer to transfer the ink. And then you need your acrylic plate to put the ink on. Oops, I dropped one. Okay, so now I have my acrylic paint block to put my paint on. Okay, now I'm ready to start printing. And don't forget to grab the palette knife, which I can't find. There it is. And then you need your palette knife. So you're going to open this up. Remember, you're scraping from the top. You're scraping from the top like this. And you want to buy a tablespoon. Okay? And your prints should be dry before you do this next one. I'm going to clean that up. Close it up. Put that off to the side. And I'm ready to roll. So I'm going to get some amount of ink on here. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and ink up my plate. And if you notice, once again, there's my car. You can see it. Okay, ready to go. Now, this is where your registration comes in. Registering your print, you're pretty much aligning it exactly on top of your previous print. You want to make sure that it is perfectly aligned, that it's perfectly registered, and you're going to go right above your previous print. Do your best. Make sure your hands are clean. And you can go right on top. I think that one came out pretty good. You're going to flip it over carefully. Okay? You're going to press it. You're going to press your paper down. You can use your hand. Push down nice and carefully. You can use the hand press. And you're just going to go over that print. Okay? If I registered this correctly, it should look pretty good. And I should have a pink car. But the rest of it's going to be brown. There we go. That's pretty good. There it is. So now I have a pink car, okay? So now I'm gonna put this off to the side and I'm gonna let it dry, and I'm gonna do the same thing to the 3 other prints that I did. Okay, now I'm ready to print again, all right? So I've taken away the areas that I wanna keep brown, and now I have my paper, I have my ink, okay? My roller, my brayer, hand press, plate, palette knife, and I have all my prints ready to go for the next part. So I'm going to start with my practice print, and I'm going to register my plate over this once I get it going, once I have the ink ready to go, and I'm going to print. So here we go. Here are my 4 prints. I've printed the blue, and now I'm going to move on to the next step, which is to cut away the areas that I want to keep blue. So I'm carving away the areas I want to keep blue. So here's my plate. You're going to do the same thing that I've been showing you for the last couple of minutes, more like 10 minutes. You're going to carve away the areas that you want to keep blue. So for this next one, I'm going to be carving away my windows, and I'm going to be carving away my sky, okay? So remember, be safe when you're carving, and you have to do a little bit of thinking because you want to be able to plan ahead. And you know what? If you mess up, that's okay, because it's the first time you're doing this, and there is a learning curve, obviously, because you've never done it before. All right? So remember, always be careful with your cutting tool. Make sure that you are cleaning your plate really well after each print, and make sure that you are keeping your prints, because you need to turn these in to me later so I can check them out, okay? And then when you're done with the final print, I'm going to show you how to label them. So that's it for now, and let's get started and have fun.